Good evening. I'm Stacey Russell. The People's Business is back, and tonight we have a special analysis of this year's budget. Welcome. In his maiden budget presentation, Minister in the Ministry of Finance, the Honorable Ryan Straughn, delivered a set of proposals that focused on assisting the most vulnerable, growing the economy, and making Barbados more resilient to climate change. Minister Straughn is here, along with Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, the Honorable Kirk Humphrey, who is also now responsible for crime prevention. They are here to interact with you, the CBC family, on how these measures will impact your lives. Also joining us remotely is Mr. Peter Wickham, a political consultant and pollster, and the Principal Director of Caribbean Development Research Services. He will provide insights into how government's fiscal proposals are likely to resonate with the masses. This is your opportunity to ask questions and to share your views. The numbers for you to call are 228-5562 and 228-5563. We're taking a very short commercial break, and we're coming right back to get down to the people's business. Minister Straughn and Minister Humphrey, thank you for joining us here in studio. And we have Mr. Peter Wickham online. I'm going to start by asking the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, what has been the reaction so far to the budget? What have you been hearing on the ground?
Good night, Ms. Russell. Good night to my fellow panelists, and good night to your listeners, viewers. The feedback so far has been very good. I think Barbadians have, in the past, gotten accustomed to a fiscal situation that was completely out of control. And I think we've been able to present a budget this time that signals that whilst we have had a significant path over the last 7 years to get where we are, that we are signaling a future for the country that I think everybody can, in a sense, believe in. And from the elements in relation to building resilience across the economy, we've had some very good feedback from the various stakeholders on that. Within the context of small business and how those implementation of those policies will help small businesses to grow whilst responding to those who are most vulnerable, I think the feedback on that has been extremely good. And then with respect to the issues in relation to how we will deal with further mitigating the cost of living, feedback on that has also been very positive in relation to that, notwithstanding the fact that there is a very uncertain global environment. I think the overall people get it and understand that the government is standing in the breach with respect to being able to respond as best it can given the fiscal circumstances.
One of the first things that I would like to raise is the catastrophe fund that has been repurposed.
Yes.
As the Resilience and Regeneration Fund from the 1st of April. Explain why this change is important.
Well, the catastrophe fund as currently constructed would only contemplate an intervention after a disaster. So oftentimes either there's a house fire and then obviously you move to recovery. We've seen with Hurricane Elsa where the houses were damaged significantly, and we utilize funds from the catastrophe fund after the fact. And I know that the Ministry of People Empowerment, working with the Department of Emergency Management. They've done some critical assessments of the homes that didn't sustain the sufficient damage during Hurricane Elsa, to be able to identify those structures that we now need to pay close attention to, so that rather than wait until the next disaster, that we're going to repurpose the fund to be able to intervene before. So whether that means changing out the materials, for example, for houses that could do with some work to make them fireproof in the first instance, but equally we have designs for up to Category 3 that we believe homes that can withstand a Category 3 hurricane, to be able to ensure then that as the storms come our way, that we don't have to be necessarily concerned about whether those structures will remain. And therefore, our focus now is on building resilience. So therefore, we're changing the purpose of the fund, changing the funding mechanism for the fund, to make sure then that we can actually do the work to be able to satisfy that resilience. Equally, with respect to water, as you know, the Barbados Water Authority is changing a lot of the old mains out. We keep seeing lots of bursts right across the country, and therefore having the Rural and Urban Development Commission fast-track the Household Water Resilience Program for persons in the community is going to be important, so that it will complement the Water Authority's ability to accelerate mains replacement across various communities across the country. So the focus here is to make sure that households, certainly starting with the most vulnerable, that we can address those first, but certainly any Barbadian with respect to participation in the Household Resilience Water Resilience Program can apply with respect to that, and more information will come to hand in relation to those particular programs.
Okay, thank you for that. Minister Humphrey, you head up a ministry that is so focused on people. What would you say in a nutshell that this budget has delivered for the people?
Good night to you, Ms. Russell. Good night to all your staff. Good night to my people who I just left in St. Michael South. Forgive me, but I had to be here. And good night to all the listeners and to the viewers. I think the last 2 years, this year and last year, we saw a budget that had so much in it for people, for the vulnerable. I remember having a conversation with a group of persons with disabilities last year in relation to last year's budget about the number of things for people. And in fact, similar to this budget, the idea was that there has never been a conversation after a budget so focused on people, because there was so much in it for people. And this year it is the same. I think it's a continuation of our policy. If you look at what we've done since we've been in office, we've focused on people. I think the one thing that pleases me here is that a number of our policies are specifically focused on children and also benefit the family. I'll just give you a few examples. The first would be, the obvious one would be foster care. Now, in the Child Care Board, we only have about 16 foster parents or so, 15 or 16. We've wanted for years. I used to be manager of the Child Care Board 20 years ago. We wanted since then to be able to increase foster support. We haven't been able to do it, or we didn't do it. This year, that's in the budget. We're doubling the foster support from $100 to $200 a week, in the hope that we will support the parents who are currently fostering, but that we get more parents to come on board. Because we want to take the children out of institutions and focus them in families. That's one. The other thing that I think is critically important is what we did in terms of the extension of the maternity leave from 12 weeks to 14 weeks. I think that allows us to focus on the child, but also on the family. And for the first time, we have 3 weeks for paternity leave. I think that's also equally important. And then the last one I would mention, but there are many more, but the last one I would mention is in relation to what we did with the disability benefit. Now, last year, it would have been announced that we were going to extend that to include autism, multiple sclerosis, Down syndrome, and cerebral palsy. And this year, when we made the announcement, I think it wasn't fully understood that the intention of the government was to cover persons who had disabilities that made them unable to function. And during the budget, Minister Straughn made it very clear that this year, from the night of the budget, and we were going to go back to October 1st to allow all those children to be able to get that benefit as well, because I think it is equally important for us to be able to look after persons with disabilities. And of course, we did housing, we did for the elderly, for persons with disabilities. I mean, there are a number of things in there for the people, and I'm very happy that as Minister of People Empowerment, there were so many things Minister Straughn delivered, and the government, for the people.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to take a break right now, and we're coming back with more of the people's business. Welcome back to the people's business. Now, I want to bring Mr. Peter Wickham in on this discussion right now. Peter, good night. How are you?
Hi, hi. Good night, Stacey. Thanks. Good to be with you. All right.
What
Well, no, I'm happy to be. Sure. Go ahead.
I'm so anxious to get your views on this budget.
No
I know
problem.
that you spoke with our news department and you had a good perspective, but tell us tonight, what
Yeah.
do the people of Barbados really have to look forward to after hearing this budget this week?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Stacey. And I try to confine my comments to the politics of the budget, largely because that's my area of expertise more so. And I think that what it did is it sent a signal of preparedness on the part of the Barbados Labour Party for, one could say, a transition. And I want to commend Mr. Minister Straughn for competently carrying the budget and carrying the conversation, and essentially demonstrating that the Barbados Labour Party has talent that goes beyond Prime Minister Motley in terms of economics. So I think that he filled the shoes well, and I think that a big part of it was essentially conveying a level of confidence. Um, the other issue was this whole question of what was in it, actually what was in the budget, and be able to give a sense of where people were going. I was particularly struck with the social aspect of it. I mean, we spoke about the issue of the paternity and maternity leave. I think that that was important. Minister Humphrey also mentioned one or two of the other social initiatives. The shift of Great and Sealy to the convent is certainly something I expect to hear Minister Humphrey speak about tonight, because that's his area of interest. And then, of course, the things like the rebate to St. Lucie and so on. So there were some other social issues which were covered. The salt tax was also something that caught my interest. But certainly, as I listened to people commenting on the budget, the key issue that seemed to a lot of people responded to was the fact that there was not any significant taxation that was levied. But I also feel that at the same time, there was not a lot of relief that was offered. And for some people, that was a concern that there wasn't a relief that was offered. There's also a prevailing concern about the cost of living, and a widespread perception that the cost of living in Barbados is extremely high. It's a perception that I share to some extent. It is that I appreciate that it is high globally. That's also something that I think that many people were not persuaded that the minister confronted as frontally as he could have. And I appreciate that it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, but there was some expansion in the basket of goods, and there were one or two other initiatives that were supposed to deal with that. But I think if I were to reflect public opinion, that would continue to be a lingering concern that people have, that there was not the type of attack on the cost of living that people were expecting. The other thing that I don't think that struck people was also the whole issue of jobs. And I do appreciate that many of the initiatives that were taken in the budget, and certainly the tourism review, the construction and so on, has created substantial employment, which will also help to deal with the issues of economic issues that people are having. But again, I'm not convinced that many people understood that there was this huge increase in the employment level and the repercussions that it could have, the benefit it would have on people as it trickles down. But that's also something that I think that Minister Straughn may have to drive home in conversations that he has over the next couple of months. But generally speaking, I was certainly happy with what I heard. And I was happy with the fact, as I said, that there was this transition from Prime Minister Motley to Prime Minister Straughn, which I understand will be fulfilled in the future. And the fact that he handled himself competently for some hours in terms of making that delivery. And, there wasn't a belief that there was anything lacking in that regard. So well done, Minister Straughn.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, for your input so far. Minister Straughn, I'm going to ask you to respond to his point about not really focusing on the cost of living. I did want to pick up on the $300 solidarity allowance and the thinking of government behind that. And then how do you respond to cost of living?
So I don't necessarily agree with that, because the government has, over the course of the last 32 months, embarked on a series of initiatives to try as far as possible working with the private sector to contain the cost of living. Now, we have seen an ease with respect to the items that we all agreed that were essential, and therefore, whilst I understand that there is more to consumption than just those particular items, we have continued the support with respect to the reduction in VAT on electricity bills, which is one of the main concerns that people have expressed over the last 32 months. And to the extent that the inclusion of the benefits for those persons who are most vulnerable is a direct impact on the families of those persons with disabilities who are the most vulnerable at a time where costs have been going up for everybody. And therefore, we've tried to be as focused as possible whilst trying to respond as broadly as possible. And I think we have been working with the private sector to be able to address a number of these particular issues. Now, as it relates to the solidarity allowance now, with respect to the fact that we have, over the course of the last 7 years, gone through a myriad of challenges in the economy. And from the very beginning, we said if you're going to share the burden, you must share the bounty. And therefore, the solidarity allowance, which is applicable to almost every Bajan who 18 years and over, who would have been ordinarily resident in Barbados over the last year, will also benefit from the fact that we have collected a little more revenue than we initially anticipated, as part of the idea of sharing the burden and sharing the bounty with respect to being able to bring some measure of relief. Now, of course, it is not really going to be sufficient, given that what we are seeing now globally, especially with the introduction of tariffs all over the place, that working with the private sector, we have been urging the private sector to source their goods in alternative markets in order to help contain the cost of living, because all that will happen in the United States and what's happening globally with the trade wars is that you will get an escalation in prices. And therefore, the government, working with the private sector in being able to, one, source alternative markets, but equally, the private sector working together to purchase larger quantities, obviously gets better pricing. And therefore, it's going to be particularly important that the business community work to find those put those alternative arrangements in place, particularly now to be able to help ease the burden, so to speak, with respect to the cost of living in the country. So I think whilst we will continue to monitor to see how much taxation we can levy to be able to reduce what is passed on, there will come a point, I suspect, where if this thing escalates further, where those buying decisions, those purchasing decisions from businesses will have to be directed as opposed to being optional in relation to being able to source these things. But as it stands, I am reasonably satisfied that we have been able to continually chip away at reducing the amount of money that's been passed on by way of costs. We continue to monitor using through the Department of Commerce to make sure that the relief is actually being passed on. Oil prices have come down, and therefore you've seen a benefit with respect to fuel prices being passed on with respect to that. But we are living in a volatile world, and the government stands in the breach to be able to help shield Barbadians as best we can.
Well, we have a Barbadian, most likely, on the line. We have our first caller for tonight. Caller, go ahead.
Hi, good evening to the panel. My question is to the Minister in the Ministry of Finance. Good evening, Mr. Straughn. Hello?
Good evening, sir.
Hi, good evening. Yes, Mr. Straughn, I want to know, first of all, when would be the $300 be issued out to those who will be eligible for it, and where can we go on which party website to see the advertised places, as you would have mentioned in your recent salvo of the budgetary proposals? And number two question, sir, as far as it relates to the reverse tax credit, the 1,300, do we have any intentions of one, upping it more to probably, let's just say, put it back at $1,400 or $1,500? Because as you would appreciate, things are very difficult for everyone in the economy. And two, when will it begin on the way it ain't been starting? Because you see, there's a lot of delay. People complaining, they're going to the BRA, and it's a whole mess. Sometimes even the customer service is not that well. When you try to call people, nobody answers. When you want to have a query, they get vexed with you that you can't ask them nothing. So I want you to seriously address that, because I don't believe it's been addressed. Thank you, sir.
Thanks very much, sir. So the solidarity allowance will be paid in May for those persons who I would have identified initially as qualifying. So if you were working and contributed last year, in the last 12 months, your pensioner on disability allowance within the welfare system, those benefits will be paid in May. For those persons who are not ordinarily fall into those groups, then the opportunity to be able to ensure that you go into the national insurance and register to make sure that we know, who you are in relation to that. Then that registration process is between April and the end of June. Once that process is complete, then if it's done before May, then it will be paid in May. Otherwise, it will be paid up until the end of June to be able to make sure that happens. And so we are aiming to make sure that as we approach May 2025, that if not all of the payments will be settled with NIS to the people, and therefore it's something that we're working on to make sure that happens smoothly. I will say to Barbadians that as far as possible, we want to make sure that we pay directly into your bank account as possible, to reduce the time and effort that it takes to be able to then issue a check, and you have to go to your bank and all of that. So we're really hoping to pay as many people via their bank account as possible to make it easier for everybody during the month of May. Now, the gentleman Rose asked about the reverse tax credit. Part of the reason why we haven't made any substantive changes to the tax structure is because the international environment as it stands right now is extremely uncertain. And therefore, given that the United States has withdrawn its support from the OECD agreement, if you like, with respect to global minimum taxes, which is Pillar 2, and the Pillar 1 elements in relation to digital services, then we have to wait and see what impact that would have with respect to companies who are from the United States residing here, and how that impacts our tax revenue. And therefore, and even to the extent that other countries may very well decide, well, if they're not doing it, then we have to revisit the entire process. So the short answer is we were not able to make any adjustments to the tax credits or any of the other tax measures, simply because as it stands now, whilst we've had a good year to date, we really don't know definitively what will happen next year. We've been working with all of the stakeholders to remind them as to how stable Barbados is, and therefore maintaining a business environment, that allows them to invest in Barbados, which is what we're working on, to be able to ensure that we can keep as many businesses as possible. So we've not made any structural changes simply because it really would be irresponsible to do so when you're not certain as to what the lay of the land will be 6 months from now or 12 months from now. As it relates to the customer service matters that the gentleman raised in relation to the Revenue Authority, we have been working, chipping away with respect to the customer service department, increasing the training and knowledge of the policy of those persons who are front-facing. And it remains a challenge because we've been trying to transition to move to integrate more of the digital side to be able to answer queries faster. And it means that citizens need to kind of get comfortable with that particular process rather than having to have someone, well, you call and someone answer the phones. I mean, it's not an excuse, but we've been trying to transition such that persons don't need to call, but you can get the answers by being able to engage the systems. It's been working in parts, but it needs to be rolled out, I think, even more aggressively to ensure that the average citizen understands if this, then that. And then therefore allowing us to be able then to track and monitor and focus then on those very key areas that you genuinely need to have a human response to, because a lot of the times we've been trying to upgrade the systems with the technologies, but there's a gap with respect to the uptake of those persons being able to make themselves available to it.
Well, we look forward to those improvements at that department. Right now, we're taking a break and we're coming back with more of the people's business. To take this run.
Right. So the grant in relation to the ball being dropped last year, it wasn't specially given to the children, and we meant for it to be also for the children. And the truth is there were a number of issues for persons with disabilities, right? Like we did a policy where we outlined the challenges for persons with disabilities. And there were challenges in relation to education, health, sports, employment. I mean, there were a number of challenges. And over the course of a year, we held several meetings. I think at the end, we held about 70 meetings with persons with disabilities, the various stakeholders, and they were able to articulate very clearly what their challenges are. And in many ways, many people dropped the ball. It was a case where the prosperity of the country, they felt, was never genuinely given to them. And therefore, as a government, we had a responsibility to go in and to rectify some of these challenges. For persons who were deaf, for persons who are nonverbal, and for persons who were blind, the grant existed previously. What we did in the last budget, we added a number of categories. And when we added those categories, we added the categories for adults and half for children. And the reality is that many persons with disabilities have no source of income. That's the truth. It's regrettable, but they have no source of income. And many persons find themselves on welfare when they're very, very competent and able to work. The other thing was that there were also issues for parents. Many of the parents who have to spend their time catering to their children do not have access to income because they can't work. And the facilities in Barbados genuinely don't exist to be able to support those parents. And it was therefore necessary for us to put in place a system to be able to offer some financial support. And therefore the grant that we put in place, I think we added almost 800 persons so far by virtue of this grant. And just yesterday, while I was at the event at Kensington, there was an event organized by Kiwanis, and a number of persons with disabilities were there. The amount of people who just came up to express thanks to the government for what we would have done. And then also we clarified that the disability grant during the budget, Minister Straughn made it very clear, those persons who are, and I want people to hear me because people may still think it's just those 4 categories. People whose children are not able to function, people who cannot function and therefore would not be able to work can benefit from the grant. So last year there were persons whose disabilities were without name, and that exists. People, there's no set name for the disability. And therefore they weren't in the 4 categories we outlined, and we rectified that. And it's just to be able to give people a sense of dignity, to go to the supermarket, to be able to feed their children, to be able to feed themselves, and so on. But I think the larger question has to be, Ms. Russell, what are we going to do so that the inclusion is beyond financial assistance, right? How do we guarantee that persons with disabilities, who are some of them quite capable of working, are able to get a job? And we had meetings with the private sector, and during the course of the presentation that we did in relation to the policy and the legislation, the thing that I was probably most bent on, to be truthful, was to have a mandatory employment clause where a percentage of every employer had to have a percentage of persons with disabilities. But in conversations with the various associations for the private sector, we agreed, let's give it some time. We improve the educational facilities for persons with disabilities. We see if we can have a voluntary arrangement and see how that works. But I am pleading with Barbadians. Where there's a person with a disability, do not discriminate. Give them an opportunity to work. Many are quite capable of working. And in fact, the statistics will show that when they actually do work, they perform just as well, and in many cases better, than persons who are supposedly able-bodied. So I think it is a whole arrangement that we have to put in place so that the inclusion means that people can benefit from any prosperity that Barbados sees. And I just think it's about dignity and being able to say, I am able to support myself, I'm able to support my child.
Excellent. I would like to bring in Mr. Peter Wickham here back into this discussion. Peter, Mr. Wickham, are you there?
Hey, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
So,
I'm here, and thanks. Sorry, go ahead.
what are your thoughts so far in terms of what Minister Kirk Humphrey has been talking about with regards to dealing with some of the most vulnerable in our society?
Yeah. Well, first, let me just say to Minister Straughn that the suggestion about the cost of living is a perception I'm dealing with more so than a reality. And I appreciate that significant efforts are being made. But I just think that in terms of the crafting of the policy, sometimes the perception is there that nothing is being done or not enough is being done. And I think that this will be an ongoing battle. So don't take the criticism personally, because I understand the challenge associated with dealing with this problem. No, in terms of what Minister Humphrey was saying, I think that the work that's being done in terms of the disabled is excellent. Look, you're operating on the back of, I would say, one of the most significant pieces of legislation that went to Parliament of late regarding the treatment of the disabled and our attitude towards. So you have a new policy in place that is really very comprehensive, and it's, in a sense, it moves the goalposts significantly in terms of us being able to deal with disabled persons. So I appreciate that. It is a work in progress, but I think that considerable work has been done. And, the initiatives that you've made as in the budget have helped significantly to bring the circle or to close the circle in that regard. but we still have some challenges. I think that there are many persons, especially in small business, that may want to employ someone who's disabled or would be happy to, but they would seek some level of support in terms of retrofitting their businesses to be able to facilitate the hiring of a disabled person. And I wondered whether maybe Minister Straughn, that's something that next year could go into the planning, where there was some kind of a fund that people could draw on to say, look, I want to employ someone who's in a wheelchair, but I need help to construct facilities to help them to access it. Or alternatively, the building has several stories and maybe we need to help access the upper levels. I think something like that could really give some assistance, because there's a lot of goodwill out there. A lot of people understand better than before. And maybe very, very interested in hiring someone with a disability, but they just don't have the financial capacity to be able to make changes to the business to facilitate that. So that is something to think about. But I think that we're on the right path where that's concerned for sure.
Thank you there, Peter. Mr. Humphrey?
Yeah, well, in relation to the policy and the legislation, I want to thank Peter for recognizing that we've actually done significant work. The legislation is transformative. I think everybody agrees that it's probably the most transformative piece of legislation for the social sector that we've done. I think the one on children is also transformative. The one we're doing on elderly is transformative, but the one on disabilities is, I really like it, it's really transformative. In terms of what the legislation says, I think we give persons 3 years to be able to retrofit their premises. We also say that in cases where you cannot do it, that provisions are made for you to be able to extend a little bit longer. Of course, we're also willing to have conversations with persons who are not able so to do, to be able to expand and to be able to make the necessary adjustments. I also must confess, people have asked if we're going to be able in a position to put incentives in place. That would be a question for Minister Straughn, so that they can do the work. But I do know where people do have the financial wherewithal so to do. Some of the bigger companies, I mean, many of them can. And I think in the spirit of the legislation and the spirit of the country, and for the sake of persons with disabilities, those who can should just do so. And we could also have that conversation around incentives later.
Minister Straughn, incentives, are they coming?
Thanks. So one of the things that we have done is, first and foremost, over the next 3 years, government itself will make sure that all of its facilities are disabled friendly. Going forward with respect to planning permissions and those types of things, it will just be part and parcel of your regular planning permission. I think one of the areas that we can look at is to see how, as part of the regeneration exercise under the new fund, whether or not we can make provision within that structure for companies to be able to retrofit. But that's something that we'll go through the regulations to look at, because it is going to be important that we appreciate that it is not only really for persons with disabilities, but as we are aging population, mobility is going to be continue to pose some challenges. So therefore, it just makes sense to make sure that you can make provision for quote unquote normal persons, given that the nature of the profile, let's say, of the population is emerging over time. So we look at the Resilience and Regeneration Fund to see how best we can have companies participate in there as a kind of like a revolving type fund, to be able to set aside some resources to be able to address that. And I think to the extent that helps, because I know that under the Ministry of Labour, for example, we did we are providing currently stipend for persons with for companies to hire persons with disabilities to bring some measure of equity opportunity, if you like, for those persons who can work, and to encourage employers to be able to take on those persons at least for a year, to be able to give them an opportunity to see how they work. So we've started, and we'll just look to see how we can put those measures in place to help those persons with the retrofitting in relation, because it really best benefits everybody. There are some days when you just can't make it up the steps, and having a well engineered ramp helps everybody to be able to think. So we'll look at it.
Okay. Now, regarding the automatic national minimum wage increase of 2% that you have announced that will come from the beginning of next year, how do you think the private sector is going to manage? Will it be sustainable?
So, every year, the maximum insurable earning ceiling increases, right? So those persons who are earning at the top, the businesses already programmed into their budgets those increases for contributions to national insurance with respect to that. Now, what we have seen before we introduced the minimum wage is that people were earning $6.25 forever as the minimum wage, and there was no movement. So all the costs went up, everything went up, and those persons who are earning at the bottom, the shop assistants and the people at the gas stations, and those persons at the bottom, really were the ones who were feeling the cost of living most, because they were literally on a fixed income whilst everybody else was moving up. Now, that automatic increase, properly programmed in, is actually going to benefit not just the people who are earning at the bottom, but it allows businesses to plan, because at the end of the day, if it is the case that you have a situation where those persons who are faced directly with a constraint, especially where inflation may be getting out of hand, as everybody's is seeming to believe, given all that's happening globally, then we must make sure then that those persons who are earning the least at least are able to cope. And therefore, whilst I know the minimum wage board will announce the new minimum wage from next month, the reality is that in between those reviews, which is every 3 years, which is what this government put in place when we introduced the minimum wage in 2021, then I know that those persons who are earning the least in the society will have an automatic increase whilst the minimum wage does the review every 3 years. And prior to 2021, there was no review of the minimum wage for the 10 years. And it's something that we believe quite strongly that within the context of the private sector, the ability to plan your affairs, whether at the top, or certainly those at the bottom, when you look at the scale, it is really going to be negligible with respect to where it may land with respect to their output. Some of the private sector have raised issues in relation to productivity. And I believe that if you are investing in your business, it means you must be investing in your people. And therefore, your productivity comes from how do you ensure that, not necessarily at minimum wage levels, because if you're investing in your people, you're not going to pay them minimum wage. But if you're investing in your people to have a stake in your business, the success of your business, then out of that, notwithstanding the challenges that you have, then the productivity that people are asking for, you will see, because people will understand how their ability to perform helps the business, and therefore in turn helps them to be able to get that. But you must invest in your people. But we believe that whilst we are seeing what we are seeing globally, that we cannot allow a situation to go on forever where the people are stuck at the bottom. Everything else is going up as it is. So this is really to shield those persons at the bottom who are earning the least, to make sure that at least they're able to keep pace as much as possible with respect to inflation. But I encourage the private sector to plan out your business accordingly, because you have to find ways of increasing the disposable income for those at the bottom. And with the growth trajectory that we are seeing, then I'm confident that the interventions that we are doing, particularly for small businesses in this budget, I think will give them enough momentum to be able to sustain the negligible cost increases with respect to the automatic 2% increase.
Okay. We're taking a break, and we're coming right back with more of the People's Business. welcome back to the People's Business, Minister Kirk Humphrey. Just before we went to the break, during that last segment, we had Mr. Peter Wickham, who mentioned Graydon Sealy School. It's going to be moving. What do you want to say about that?
Well, first of all, let me appreciate that Graydon Sealy is an institution in the community. In St. Michael South, in Paddock Road, in that area, it's an institution. And the school has produced significant persons all over Barbados, people who, if I call their names, people would recognize them. So I understand that what the school means to persons, you know. I actually won my nomination in Graydon Sealy School. I was there immediately before I came here. My sister went to Graydon Sealy. So I understand how people feel. I mean, it's there and I understand how they feel. And we are going to have conversations as a government with the residents of Paddock specifically about how they feel about the move. But I also know that the school, St. Michael South itself, is a very compact area. There's not a lot of space for a lot of activities. Graydon Sealy is a very compact space. And I personally, when we started having these conversations, I went over to take a second look at what used to be St. Ursula's. And the truth is, as much as I wanted to make a strong fight for the existing building, it became difficult when I saw the facilities over there. There's a massive playing field. There's a potential for a swimming pool, and I believe people in Barbados need to learn to swim. When I was in Ministry of Blue Economy, I started a program called Swim for Life. So there's a pool, people get the opportunity to learn to swim. The rooms are also brighter. It's a brighter school, it's a bigger space. I think the potential is there. And I would also want to say, when I sat my 11 plus, I actually sat my 11 plus at Queen's College. But at that time, Queen's College was in what is now the Ministry of Education. And Queen's College moved to where it is in St. James, and it's still the Queen's College. So I think Graydon Sealy is going to remain Graydon Sealy. It is difficult for me as well because it's the only secondary school in my constituency that is government-owned. And therefore, it would mean my secondary school moves to St. Michael South Central. But I think when I think about the children and the students, the potential for them to have a bigger space, brighter classrooms, you know, newer rooms with technology and so on, it's difficult for me to say that they shouldn't go. But I do believe we're going to have a larger conversation around what it means to the persons. I mean, it's an honor, you know. It belongs to them. It's part of the DNA. And so I don't want to dishonor that. We need to have that conversation. But I think it also speaks to our deeper transformation of schools. If you listen to the budget, part of it was how do we transform education? How do we make education more relevant to persons in a new age? And I think we'll be able to do a lot more at the new school. So I heard the question from Peter, and I intend to have further conversations with my constituents. But I also believe that we have to make the best spaces available to all. And I think, truthfully, the space over there is a bit more in terms of what we can do education-wise. But it's not a done deal necessarily that we were going to move without conversation, but it's going to be a very difficult conversation in relation to which space offers more opportunity.
Now remind us of the original name of that school.
The Garrison School.
Yes.
The Garrison School. So I still call it Garrison School because people remember it easily, the Garrison School. My sister went to the Garrison. And yeah, so people believe in it, like all Barbadians. I think one of the deeper, the more difficult part of Barbadians accepting the educational transformation and what we propose in relation to schools of excellence is because people are so tied to their school. When I went to St. Michael's, when I see a St. Michael's school tie or epaulets as I used to have, and I see people walk in the streets in St. Michael uniform, I go, you feel it, you know, you feel a connection to your school. And I think when we started talking about the education transformation, people started thinking, well, this is not how I know my school. What's going to happen to my school? So I understand that, but Graydon Sealy, formerly the Garrison, I think the culture of the school remains, the legacy of the school remains, what it means to people remains. And therefore, I think that in relation to what we're offering the children, it might just be a better deal. But again, we're going to have conversations about it.
Okay. I'm sure they will be looking forward to having those conversations.
Absolutely.
Now, one of the things, Minister Straughn, that we have heard some pushback on is this proposal that you have made about a daily car rental levy of $10 per day on the car rental fees charged by car rental companies. there's some companies that are saying it can hamper their business. It might put the tourists off from taking those longer rentals from them. How do you respond?
Well, first of all, we have had a policy from the very beginning in relation to being able to share the burden in response to broader public policy. It started with the introduction of the room rate levy, which right now each visitor pays on the hotel room, and it varies based on the category of the room that you're renting. And to the extent that we are doing a few things here, because it's not so much about the rating of itself. One of the challenges and one of the things I pointed to in the budget was that we are creating the Barbados Oceans and Coastal Authority. Now, we have been working to see how we can implement something called carbon credits to be able to help deal with some resilience matters. But that framework is a little too complicated with respect to where we would like it to be in order for it to be as effective, because it requires measurement and a whole set of things involved. But as it stands now, our beaches are really in crisis. So we need to be able to segment some direct dedicated funding to be able to respond to shoring up our beaches. Hurricane Beryl exposed some significant fissures, if you like, with respect to, so we've done good work in terms of sea defenses, but it needs to be accelerated in order to ensure that the Barbados that we know can actually be sustained. And therefore, this is one part of us being able to tell the story about how visitors to our country can help with respect to the beach rehabilitation process. We are working with the investors along the West Coast and the South Coast to bring a program in where they contribute as well to the upkeep of the beaches, but we also need to have some offshore sea defenses such that any works that are done on the beaches can be protected offshore. This is going to take significant investment, and therefore it's not that we want to curtail business, and I think the reality is that there's a legitimate concern about the persons who are operating illegally within that space, and therefore between the Barbados Police Service as well as the Ministry of Transport and Works, namely the Transport Authority, we're going to be working to make sure that we can crack down on those persons and get those persons to operate legitimately within the space so that the concerns are not there. So whilst I hear the concerns, and just let me just also bear in mind that very shortly we'll be taking to Parliament a piece of legislation that, for example, the persons who do Airbnb, those monies as well that we put on in 2018 will be done automatically. So visitors appreciate that when you travel, that there are certain costs to maintaining the infrastructure that they enjoy. And whilst we accept that it's not only visitors that frequent our beaches, at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we have a mechanism that allows us to be able to provide additional support to the maintenance of our beaches, because without Barbados' beaches, then the overall economy really then starts to be at risk. And therefore, I will meet with the stakeholders in the industry. It was something that when was proposed, we looked at it and said it made sense, and therefore our ability to explain to people this is what it is for. I do not think that with the more environmentally aware tourists that we have these days, I don't think that there will be necessarily a concern with respect to that, but we will meet and hear their concerns in relation to the quantum in terms of those long-term things, because it might make some sense with respect to that. But the underlying objective here is to make sure that as we are creating the Barbados Ocean and Coastal Authority, that they have dedicated funding, that in addition to what government votes, that there's a regular cash flow to allow them to accelerate the work that needs to be done to protect all of the beaches, and to ensure then that the beaches that belong to we actually can make sure that they're maintained.
Okay. We have a caller on the line. Caller, go ahead, please.
Yeah, good night, Mr. Russell. See you on the panel.
Good night.
Good night.
Right. When it comes to politics, I'm politically blind, but more politically inclined. So I will ask the panel to indulge my what I'm going to say. I'm going to say in a four-letter line poetic quote. I say, who is budgeting who? We don't have a clue. As I quote, are the politicians really interested in us or our vote? Because I find with this that the less fortunate is always feel the pinch. But as I say, I'm not so politically inclined, right? I'm more politically. So that's how I will let the panel to answer that question for me.
Well, sir, I can only say that we have, from the very beginning of the administration, been very, very focused that we understood that adjustments had to be made, but we've made specific provisions to ensure that socially we kept the society together. We, from the very beginning, we focused on ensuring that there was an absolute minimum floor for social spending. We've expanded on that. During the pandemic, we also increased the welfare grants by 40%, specifically to make sure that we could allow persons who were most vulnerable to be able to see their way through what would have been a very tough time. And we've continued on that trajectory because we recognize that there are some structural issues within families and within communities. And this budget certainly sought, as I mentioned earlier, sought to address the fact that because the minimum wage circumstance were left unattended for so long, that we wanted to make sure that the automatic increases were there, built in, to make sure that those persons who were earning the least in the country were able to see the way through. So I regret that you believe that politicians are only interested in people's votes. Now, granted, votes matter, but to the extent that we have been good stewards of the faith that I think people have placed in us over these last 7 years, I think it is safe to say that we have been extremely attentive with respect to those persons who are the most vulnerable. We will continue to do so, and as circumstances allow, then obviously other measures will be put in place. But I think we have had very, very, very close scrutiny, close scrutiny to ensuring that those persons who face extreme vulnerability, that we can at least try to mitigate those vulnerabilities by providing resources where we needed to direct them.
I also just want to say I appreciate the poetry. First of all, I appreciate the poetry. I try to dabble in poetry myself, so I appreciate the poetry. But I think he's asking a fundamental question that speaks to the latent, almost distrust between those who govern and those who were governed, right? Mm-hmm. Like, who's budgeting who? In a way, it's an expression of frustration that is expressed by different people in different ways. Now, those who they elect may not necessarily have their best interests at heart. And I think all the things that we would have done would suggest that we do have the best interests of the Barbadian public at heart. And it could be very extensive in relation to what we would have done in the social sector. I don't think we have enough time. But certainly we spent, as Minister Straughn said, we increased the welfare support by 40%. We extended the support to the number of NGOs that were doing business with us, all of the NGOs that work with the National Disabilities Unit, all the NGOs that work in the ministry, to make sure that they can deliver, because they recognize that there is this distrust and that there is an authenticity that NGOs have that governments will never have, and that people prefer many times to deal with NGOs. And so we strengthen the NGOs to be able to also deliver goods and services directly to people. I think also when you look at the legislation, the policy for child protection and those things, you would have done a lot of work. And I think we have to work continuously to build and maintain that trust. You know, there was a study that was done, and it said that during COVID, the trust in governments went up. people trusted governments during COVID more than they do before, than they did before COVID, and surely more than they do now. But during COVID, when they relied on the government's support, they felt the government was delivering. And I also think people think when you become a politician, you forget who you are. I have never forgotten who I am. I know Ren has never forgotten who he is. Most of us just came from ordinary circumstances, and we do our best with a very limited budget to be able to best deliver goods and services to the people that we care about. I will say this lastly. Most of the time, when the rain falls, I think about in my head whose house is going to get wet. You know, who's going to have to deal with flooding, who's going to have to deal with leaking, and those are the things that we care about. So I understand the question, I understand the frustration, but I think our social policy has been very, very, very sound.
Okay. We are taking a break, and we're coming right back with more of The People's Business. Welcome back to The People's Business. We have a caller on the line. Caller, kindly go ahead.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Everyone, and Straughn, I've got government people all very been working, and this vision share.
I'm sorry, caller, we can hardly hear you. Can you give us a call back, please? Next caller, please. Do we have another caller on the line? Okay. Mr. Peter Wickham. I'm sorry, Mr. Wickham. I've been talking with you tonight as if we went to school together, calling you Peter.
That's what I prefer, actually.
Mr. Wickham.
I was keen. Yeah, I was keen on commenting on this whole question of the impact that the budget was having on people. And certainly Minister Humphrey has a special interest in the lower socioeconomic bracket. But I certainly was hearing a lot of comments from the middle socioeconomic bracket that still remembers the withdrawal of allowances. And I don't know whether there's something that Minister Straughn can say with respect to that group, because in my going around, I have been hearing a lot of comments from people who feel that, you know, there's always something done to take care of the poor. The rich take care of themselves. But what happens to the middle class group? What happens to that middle socioeconomic bracket that feels often as though it's carrying the burden of taxation without the relief that comes to the lower income group, and you know, the absence of any significant concessions that are being given. I don't know if Minister Straughn can tell us anything about that.
So Peter, the way I would answer that question is that we've been focused on how do we drive growth, because it is really the growth that is going to for those persons in the middle that is going to have the biggest impact with respect to their incomes. The government has, over the course of the last 7 years, been able to have 3 wage increases delivered to public servants, which in turn has meant that the private sector as well has been able to do the same. Now, there was a time when there was a certain regularity with respect to wage increases happening nationally, and I hope certainly that over the course of the next few years that Barbadians can start to see that kind of regularity resume, because that is really the test with respect to where persons in the middle will be able to see most benefit. Now, by the same token, there are going to be opportunities for investment, which, as we are trying to do both on the public sector as well as the private sector, to have persons invest their monies in legitimate opportunities rather than these scams and stuff that you're hearing about ever so often, that actually redounds to their benefit, but also to the country's benefit as well. And therefore, I think we have to understand that given what took place before, with respect to the expanse of allowances that actually contributed to the build-up in relation to debt and debt service, that we don't want to go back down that road again. So therefore, the extent to which genuine inclusion in relation to investment in the economy, both, well, the domestic space, but also opportunities for Bajans to invest outside of Barbados, is really where I genuinely believe that we need to focus, because growing the economy, growing the scope for investment opportunities is really what is going to redound to the long-term benefit, not just of those in the middle, but certainly those who are not in the middle, but being able equally to participate either through their credit union or any other collective investment vehicle that they may wish to participate in. So growth is really the key. The reforms that we're implementing in relation to digitization is critically important. Adoption of the payment systems as they come on stream, critically important, because all of those efficiencies allow us then to be able to save money, but equally deploy those savings to the production of to productivity across the economy.
We have a caller on the line.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, good evening. I'm calling from New York. I have a small business in Barbados, a couple of villas, okay? First of all, let me thank Mr. Humphrey. I think he's doing a good job for what I'm seeing and hearing.
Thank you.
This question is for Mr. Straughn. Mr. Straughn, I would like you to pay special attention to my business. I know you're busy, but Kaipo, I have a problem with Kaipo. We sent for a waiver, and up to now 3 years, we haven't heard anything. The taxes, they had a glitch. I hired one of the best accountants, the firms down there. And they had a glitch with the computer. And 3 years, they charged me late fee. And up to now, nobody addressed it. I would like you personally to take my information and see if you could get back to me, see if you could help me. Because it's just sleepless nights for nothing. And next thing, with the Prime Minister traveling, if it's arranged properly, we can raise some money up here for to help with the budget. So that traveling for the Prime Minister shouldn't be a question at all. I just want to make it short, but attempt to make it short. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Or is it understand?
Thanks for the question, sir. As it relates to Kaipo, this has been a long-standing issue which the ministry has been resolving with Kaipo. So if you don't mind, leave your details with the producer, and my office will contact you in relation to resolving that particular matter. I won't comment on the Prime Minister's travel, other than to say that I believe that Barbados has benefited significantly from not just the Prime Minister's travel, but all of us being able to go and represent Barbados' interests globally. And I think we have to ensure that we appreciate that unless we engage the world and we are at the table when decisions are being made, then at least we have the chance of being able to get the best for Barbados. If we are not at the table, then other people will be deciding for us without our input. So I think there can be no reservation about government, whether it is ministers or public officials or the same persons within the private sector that we work with, NGOs and the like, to be able to go and represent Barbados' interests. And I think that whatever that cost may be, we have to ensure that we get the bang for the buck, so to speak, in relation to that.
Okay. Mr. Humphrey, you now have responsibility for crime prevention in Barbados.
I do.
What does that mean for you? What can Barbadians look forward to?
Well, first of all, I would want to thank Minister Lane for the work that he would have done when he held the portfolio. I think people did not fully appreciate the intensity of the job and the work that Corey would have done to be able to put us in a position where I think we actually have a good platform on which to start. I also would want to thank the Attorney General for the work that he would have done. Again, if you look at some of the things we've done, the legislation we've changed to make it tougher on crime, the support we've done for the judicial system and specifically with the judges and the courts and things that we have done to be tougher on gun crime and those things, it is clear that the government is very serious about addressing crime. I have an affection for a saying that Tony Blair used as his slogan when he was first, I think around 97, tough on crime, tougher on the causes of crime. I think tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. We have to be tough on both. We have to be tough on crime and its causes. I know enough to know that this is not going to be an overnight fix. And I'm not going to promise anybody that this is an overnight fix. But I do know that this is really what the people's business is. This is it. At the end of the day, this is work for all of us. I think we have to be able to see it and to call it out. But I think in a more philosophical, deeper but truer realization is that, we raise our children. We raise our children. We have to be able to teach our children certain things. We have to be able to strengthen our communities, build back a lot of the community groups. We've seen a degradation in terms of community organizations for years. I know Minister Griffith is now working to rebuild some of that. I wrote a paper years ago, can the state build social capital? Because social capital being the social organizations and these community groups, they normally come naturally. Can the state build those? And we have to build back some of these organizations. We have to start at the core. I want to work very closely with the police, and to answer your question more directly, I want to work with the police and the Attorney General to be able to deal with those who've committed crime. But if you commit a crime in Barbados, you are dealing with the Attorney General. That's his job. That's the police's job. I want to be there to help prevent that from happening in the first place. There are a number of persons whose names are known to Barbadians for things that are considered, in crime or criminal related, who've reached out to me since I took this portfolio. Many persons and said, they call me Kirk. Kirk, I would like to be able to work with you. Kirk, I would like to be able to deal with some of this crime. Kirk, all over Barbados. And I'm going to work, as I'm working with the police, I'm going to work with a number of the blocks. We've actually done a lot of work on blocks previously. Look, I grew up, says Miss Russell, I grew up in the Pine. I know what it is to be living in an area where a very small percentage of the people who reside in that area involve themselves in criminal activity. I've seen the police shut down an entire community for a very small percentage of the people to be able to go after those persons. So I understand how you can stigmatize an entire area and then consequently discriminate against those persons because they come from that area. So there are a number of hot spots across Barbados, right? Almost all over Barbados. And you name them. But the reality is that a lot of these will be housing areas, housing schemes. But when you look at the fact that you bring together large numbers of people, and then you have small areas where they can engage in activity. You have a number of persons whose families are not the traditional nuclear family, or fathers are not playing a role, or mothers, as was the case with my own mother, having to work 2 shifts in a day to be able to provide. So the children, many times, children are home, parents meanwhile, and children are out. I think we have to deal with the root causes of crime. We have to deal with the deeper societal challenges and be able to address those challenges. That is my work. And I'm going to work with the NGOs, I'm going to work with the police, I'm going to work on all the blocks to be able to do it. I'm not promising Barbados an overnight fix. Persons in the private sector have reached out, they want to help. There are a number of people, people who you would never imagine are so concerned about the crime and the crime situation. I think I will close by saying as well, the truth is that crime itself in Barbados is down. The statistics will show. It would be the gun-related crime that has gone up, and that is the crime that would have people concerned. So I think if Barbadians would just give me a little bit of time to be able to better understand the portfolio, to be able to hit the ground with a little bit more intensity. I think also Barbadians have to show the police a little bit more respect as well. Because there are cases where you see on social media where the police are trying to do their job, to go into communities, following a lead or so on. And people are now making it difficult, posting it on social media and so on. I think we have to allow the police in Barbados to be able to do their job and to support the police in those regards. I think We've also seen the Attorney General has made it clear that in circumstances where they've overstepped, that there are going to be consequences for overstepping. But it has to be that balance. And so I look forward to having the crime portfolio. I must also tell you, from also being very honest, I enjoy the fact that a lot of the heavy lifting in my ministry was done. The amalgamation, the legislation, the policies. You know, I was about implementation. But because the heavy lifting in my ministry is done, I think we now also have a little bit more space to be able to put my energies and my effort toward this. This means a lot to me. Not so much about addressing and preventing crime, but building people. Building the kind of person that can make a positive contribution to the country. You do that, you reduce crime. And my focus then is about being able to build the best possible human being, the best possible person. I think we're going to have direct relations with the private sector. There are going to have to be job opportunities. The Prime Minister, during the reshuffle, she announced that we separated the Ministry of Education. I think the focus on tertiary level and training, and I think Graydon Sealy is to become a place for training as we go forward. So I think training and offering more opportunities for people to be able to train, just an alternative to the block. But the block life is very alluring. I understand it. You know, when you sit next to a man who says to you, I will kill for you, and he means it, like he literally would kill for you, that's a lot of love. Now, we want that love, but we want that love to be manifested differently. You know, to give that same level of love and support, but to do it differently. We also thought about the houses. A lot of our houses aren't built with what people call a veranda or patio or porch, you know, so people can go and relax in the evening. A lot of them are too tight. There are not enough spaces for people to play, and then people end up on the blocks. When last thing, when I was in St. Michael's South as a candidate before I won, I said to one of the guys one day, you know, I'm going to destroy your block. He said, oh, you're going to destroy the block? You're going to bring the police? I was like, nope, not destroy. We brought training. A number of persons were trained. They have jobs. Most of them are working. That particular block doesn't really exist because the guys are working. So I think it's going to be a long-term thing. I ask Barbadians for their support as we do it. And if anybody who's engaging in crime is listening to me at the moment, please just cease and desist. The country doesn't need it. And then, this is the final thing, honestly. We met, the Prime Minister and myself, we met with some parents of some of the persons who were killed. We never said this before. Some of the parents. And it was really hard on those parents to watch, you know, to have conversations about losing a child. It's difficult. And, you know, many of the parents, their hearts are crushed. And you don't want to be crushing your mother's heart the way that we saw these hearts being crushed. And the other thing is that we saw that a number of persons in their lifetime, it's hard on the parents, and then when they're dead, there's no money. The state has to bury a lot of these children, a lot of these young men. They're still young. So I think we have to get real about the crime situation, and I'm going to give it my best shot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to take a commercial break here now, and we're coming back with some more of The People's Business. Welcome back to The People's Business. Tonight we had a budget special, And we're about to wrap up. Our three guests tonight are Peter Wickham. He is a political scientist, and I'm going to start by asking him to provide his final words before we go on to Ministers Kirk, Humphrey and Ryan Straughn.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on the program, Stacey, and gentlemen, thank you for having me your company. It's difficult to speak about our budget without mentioning the reaction of the leader of the opposition. And I think that for many people was, well, certainly was striking. But I guess I can't really discuss it if he is absent. But, you know, the comments that he made and certainly some of the issues that he raised were interesting, and certainly the length of time that he spoke were significant. But if I were to make my final closing remarks in relation to what we've had today, is to express a little bit of concern on behalf of the PSV operators, who also were a group that felt as though they were a little bit left out in the whole scheme of things. I think that we have a lot to do in Barbados in the area of public transportation. And I think that they unfortunately are on the receiving end of a lot of the burden in terms of that area. I also think that they are because of a lot of confusion. But certainly that would have been one of the sectors that has been crying out for help in the wake of the budget. But by and large, I think that the budget was a good exercise, and I look forward to Mrs. Straughn's next budget, assuming, of course, that we have another budget before we have an election, because this is something that the opposition would also. Thanks for having me involved in the conversation, and all the best.
Thank you so much, Mr. Peter Wickham, political scientist. Thank you for joining us tonight on The People's Business. Next, Minister Kirk Humphrey. You have the portfolio of people empowerment and elder affairs. You're also now responsible for crime prevention in Barbados. Your hands are full. Your final words here tonight.
Well, I would want to thank all Barbadians for the support I've gotten. I feel like wherever I go in Barbados, people reach out, they say, thank you, you're doing a good job. They think the government is doing a good job. I think people are particularly pleased about the work we would have done. One gentleman said to me, you know, when you got moved, I was wondering why the Prime Minister moved you. It seemed like a demotion in his mind. And now he's so thankful because he's now getting to the age where he's elderly, and he's saying he's happy that people are talking about these issues, elderly persons with disabilities and so on. And I think these social issues are critical, you know. I think we have to get our economic concerns addressed, but we also have to address our social concerns. And I recall the Prime Minister's conversation with me when I took up this portfolio. She said, you know, we focus a lot on the economy because we obviously had to. Barbados was in a desperate, dire state when we took up the government. And we need to get our social programming right. And I think I want to thank my staff in the Ministry of People Empowerment. I want to thank Ms. Ford, who went before me, MP Ford, former Minister Ford, for the work that we would have done. I think Barbadians can see that we've done a lot. I didn't get an opportunity to speak on the homeless, but we're also doing a lot in relation to the homeless. And in relation to crime, as I said, I just hope we have the opportunity to talk about that in more detail when I have more opportunity to work. But I also recognize that part of the announcements was that we were going to move the persons who are special constables, the island constables, to become police officers, and 46 persons or so, and just strengthen the force. So I think there's a lot to look forward to as we go forward. My hands are certainly tied, but I believe that at the end of the day, we came to office to work. You know, I think we were given a big mandate, and we have to deliver. So there are lots of things happening. I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be part of the change that we're bringing.
Minister Ryan Straughn, you're the minister in the Ministry of Finance. You presented your first budget. Prime Minister Motley has already tipped you to become the next finance minister of Barbados. What are your final words here tonight?
Ms. Russell, let me thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion. The feedback that I have gotten from Barbadians have been very good. And I just want to say to Barbados tonight that we are about to embark on a new 400 years of development on our terms. And so when we reach May 14th of this year, having to celebrate 400 years of the landing, the first landing in Barbados, I want us to signal and keep in our minds that the resilience that we're seeking to build, not just with respect to climate, but is really about social resilience as well, economic resilience, and all of that is intertwined with respect to how we treat to each other. And therefore, I want Barbadians to appreciate that it is a journey, and therefore we must pass on to the next generation a lighter baton, not a heavier baton, as we inherited. And therefore, our focus is ensuring that we can deliver on those things that matter to people, but equally provide a wide range of opportunities for our people. So I think Barbadians can look forward, at least is the government's intention, to maintain the fiscal discipline, to ensure that budgets like these that people can be satisfied with. Not everybody will always be happy with respect to what may or may not happen at any given point in time, but that is part of the cut and thrust with respect to how you prioritize policy. So I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I think that Barbadians can look forward to future budgets not being anxious about what is likely to be taxed or not, but knowing that there are steady hands at the wheel of government being able to chart a bright future for all of Barbados. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The Honorable Minister Ryan Straughn, the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, the Honorable Kirk Humphrey, the Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, and also having responsibility for crime prevention and political sciences, Barbadian. He's currently overseas and joining us remotely, Mr. Peter Wickham. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us tonight for The People's Business. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in. Thank you, callers, for getting in touch with us. We look forward to hosting you soon for the next People's Business. I'm Stacey Russell. Bye for now.